Good morning, America. How are ya? Monday morning rail. We'll be 500 miles before the day is done. I'm the city of New Orleans. Hi, I'm Denny Jelsma, and I'm at the world-famous Jacksonville Terminal Railroad Museum in beautiful Jacksonville, Florida, where the sun always shines, and running trains are always a pleasure. Today is Monday, and you know what we do for Monday? You guessed it. It is show and tell starts right now.
Good morning and thank you, Denny. Today we're going to talk about Fernandina Beach. As you know, we cover railroad history from Jacksonville and the North Florida, South Georgia areas. And Fernandina is a quaint little fishing village just north of Jacksonville by about 30 minutes. The railroad in the state of Florida was built between Fernandina and Cedar Key. It was the first railroad in the state, built by David U. Lee. And his intent was to build a railroad connecting steamships between New Orleans and Cedar Key, railing across the state and then exporting out of Fernandina. The Civil War broke out and his plan was short-lived. He was arrested as a Confederate
sympathizer,
and the railroad was pulled up while he was arrested and not put back in service until the late 1860s. So his vision of a steamship line never materialized, but the natural deep port was very vital to the shipping of lumber and lumber products out of the state. And it was thought to be, according to the historians, was the second largest port in the eastern United States at that time. And you got to remember, these were sailing vessels. Very few of them were power assisted by steam. So his theory was to cut the time from going around the state of Florida, around the Keys, to running by rail across the state. So timber was the largest exporter in Fernandina. The entire waterfront was wharves and docks with rail accessibility. And in the late 1890s, phosphate started showing up, and it became the second largest exporter in Fernandina. This continued up into the 1920s when they relocated to the west coast of Tampa and other ports of the Gulf. The state of Florida started building a highway system, State Road 1, connecting the inland area to the Amelia Island. By 45, it was renamed A1A. But in this time, the railroad was officially the seaboard. The predecessors of the Florida Railroad had succumbed and was now the seaboard as of 1903. The phosphate industry ended and the Depression hit. Several fires and hurricanes devastated the town, but it rebounded. But when the phosphate industry left and the Depression hit, it hit a low point. And it wasn't until 1938 when the pulp mills located in Fernandina. One on the north end of town, which we built a model of, was Container Corp, and the south end was Rayonier. The Rayonier plant was built on the site of the old phosphate mill. The railroads flourished with the pulp mill, as pulp mills after the war really flourished all over the southeast, with the longleaf yellow pine was one of the major timbers. Pine was a very good, strong, cheap, quick growing tree, so the lumber industry was big in the South. Well, things continued on. The town prospered as a pulp mill town, and by the late 1940s, the seaboard was able to start dieselizing. So their main locomotives were the Alco RSs and RSCs. These locomotives continued to be their main switching locomotive or main locomotive all the way up into the seaboard coastline merge. The passenger station ceased being a passenger station in the 30s. The seaboard made a connecting bus run to Yulee, and the station became a crew base and yard office. In the 60s, the station was donated and became the Chamber of Commerce to Fernandina, and the coastline, seaboard coastline, moved into the freight house next door. And in later years, it moved to the current location on the south end of the yard, where the freight house is here is now a hotel. The seaboard coastline came into play in 1967, and about the only major change was the newer big cars, cushion box cars, and the wood chip cars came into play in the late 50s. And one of the things were the seaboard's Jolly Green Giant box car came in the early 60s, and when you saw one of those, you knew it was different. The paper industry continued well up to, actually they're still there, but very little changed up until the railroads were deregulated. Of course, you had the family lines come in and then CSX, but when the railroads deregulated, the pulpwood cars went away, the wood chip cars went away, and the railroad is a short line now. But overall, the railroads changed names, the pulp mills changed names, but the mills are still there, the railroad's still there, and it's really a beautiful town with its shops, its restaurants, the beach, Fort Clinch. There's a lot of history there, and it's just a beautiful town. And for a rail fan, when you can find a place to take your family and rail fan, it's a win-win situation. So thank you for listening, and have a great day.
Hi, I'm Greg Tern, and I want to really thank Rodney for giving us this history of Fernandina. I specifically want to talk about the paper mill and give you an idea that you might want to use on your layout. And the big thing about this is there were a lot of paper mills in the area. This one specifically is at Fernandina, served by the seaboard, but there are at least 4 different operations that we can use this as a model of. Okay, we've talked about Fernandina. There was a paper mill at Foley, Florida, which is toward the west coast of Florida. That mill was served by the Atlantic coastline and the Live Oak, Perry, and Gulf. And we hope to be able to incorporate a little bit of the Live Oak, Perry, and Gulf on this layout in the future, but we could use this mill complex to represent Foley. It could also represent the paper mill at Jessup. That mill was served by the Atlantic coastline and the Southern. And in fact, the last time we had a train come into this area, it was in fact the coastline Jessup local. And so the local came in, dropped off cars, and then went back out after serving industries at Jessup. It came here. The other thing the other main mill we could count it as would be the St. Regis paper mill on the Broward River. That was served by the seaboard coastline and the Atlantic coastline. So when you look at this, we could have this as 4 different places, 4 different operating sequences, served by 4 different railroads, all using the same buildings. And it gives us a great deal of operation. In fact, the next train that's going to come into here will be a seaboard local out of Baldwin, and so the next time this is one, we will actually be treating this as one of the 2 Fernandina paper mills, because it will be being served by the Seaboard Airline. I just think that's a really neat idea, especially if you have a smaller layout, to use one industry as multiple locations. So that's my take on this.
Well, thank you, Rodney and Greg, for that interesting information about Fernandina. You know, the Jacksonville Terminal Railroad Museum is really proud of our members and the skill level that they bring, and that is museum quality work that you see when you come and visit. Now, you can see our videos on Facebook. Just go under Denny G Jelsma on Facebook, and the same thing, Denny G Jelsma on YouTube. Make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube and the like, and the same thing on Facebook. And make sure that leave some comments. And so this is the end of Show and Tell. It's brought to you by Jelsma Graphics. Remember, go to jelsma.com on the internet for all your railroad clothing. And that's the way it is at the world famous Jacksonville Terminal Railroad Museum in beautiful Jacksonville, Florida, where the sun always shines and running trains is a pleasure.